It's Croctober, the official celebration of Crocs fans like you. So whether you like to rock your classic clogs, get cozy and fuss-lined, personalize with your favorite Jibbitz charms, or even, dress up like a clog for Halloween, it's time to tell your story and share your style. Join the Croctober celebration with Crocs fans around the world. Go to crocs.com to discover the range of shoes and find a pair that's iconic like you. Crocs, celebrating you all month long.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/campaign to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be.
Welcome back to I Want That Too, the podcast where Disney merch meets Disney history. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and as always, I'm joined by my lovely co-host, Lauren Hersey.
Hi, Jim. And today's episode is a little different, but in the best possible way. I promise you that. We've been diving into the Disney history lately, especially because it's October, and that's a huge month for Disney fans because we're celebrating both Magic Kingdom and Epcot's anniversaries. But today's topic plays nice. It's nice and adjacent. It comes from one of our listeners, Paul, and I think it goes really well with Magic Kingdom and Epcot opening. And what Paul suggested is that we take a little, walk down memory lane and talk about Disney maps and Disney fun maps in particular.
Okay, and again, want to thank Paul for the great suggestion. It got us thinking because the souvenir maps that were done for the parks weren't your average maps. These really beautifully detailed pieces of art that, if you look close, they capture the evolution of the parks over the years, and now, honestly, they're considered quite the collectible.
Yes, and we have got a really special guest today to talk about these now highly sought-after collectibles, and that is our friend, former Disney Imagineer of 33 years, Jim Shull. So if you're a fan of the Disney Dish or Disney Unpacked, you have probably heard all of Jim Shull's amazing stories and about the projects he's worked on and what led to some of our favorite ride shows and attractions that we see in the theme parks today.
Well, but part of the Jim Shull story that I love, and in fact, there were so many Imagineers that have told me this very same story about, sure, they went to the parks, but they brought home the souvenir map and they put it up in their bedroom. In fact, Mr. Shull, you've shared that photo with us on at least one Disney Unpacked. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think I did. But by the way, hello again, Lauren. And I won't say hello to Jim Hill because he sees me all the time.
There we go.
But hello to you, Lauren. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing about the Disney Fun Maps that were so unique is that they were very inexpensive and they could pack flat. I mean, they were so inexpensive that no parent in their right mind would ever argue with the child saying, can I have 50 cents to take home a map? Yeah, you can have 50 cents to take home a map. And so, like so many future Imagineers, I took home a map and I would put that on my bedroom wall and study it over and over and over again. And it really gave me the inspiration to become an Imagineer decades later.
Well, it's so great you tell this story because I want to share a parallel story that I got from Craig McNair Wilson, also eventually an Imagineer. In fact, he helped with the development of Tower of Terror, and he's the guy, Lauren, who created Streetmosphere for Disney MGM. Okay, but Craig tells this story about, he did the same thing as Jim. He went with his family to Disneyland. He brought home a souvenir map. So now it's time for show and tell at school. And so Craig brings in the map from home. And he stands at the front of the class and holds up the map, and this is what I got when I went to Disneyland. And the teacher is looking at him with this, and it's like, Craig, what's the deal with these sheets of vellum that you've got taped to the map? And he's like, oh, well, those are the lands that I'm going to design for the park when Walt Disney hires me when I grow up, because I'm going to be an Imagineer. And now, mind you, it took till 1985. But yes, he did, in fact, get hired as an Imagineer. And again, just like Mr. Shull was saying, that they studied their craft. They looked intently at how one builds a theme park based on that map, and then went forward. And let's be honest here, a lot of these guys owe their job to the man who drew that map, veteran Imagineer Sam McKim.
And we are going to talk all about Sam here in just a couple minutes. And I mean, but Jim Shull, you ended up at Disney too. And I want to start at the very beginning of your Disney journey. I guess maybe not the beginning with the map, but to when you actually started with the company. Because, when you go on the Disney Dish or you're talking on Disney Unpacked, oftentimes you're talking about a specific ride, show, or attraction. But I wanted to start with you. Like, can you tell our listeners a little bit about how you got started at Disney, and what are some of the jobs that you've held while you were at the company?
Well, I'm of an era of Disney Imagineers that took a long, circuitous route to get to their company and their job. And this is pretty typical. A lot of the Imagineers came from places like entertainment, or they scooped ice cream at the park, and then they found themselves there. I came from a different source. I came out of the studio because I worked as a storyboard artist for Disney television. And I also worked for some others, but mostly Disney television. And I did a lot of the TV shows and a few feature films. But I also drew upon some friendships. And one of them was Tim Kirk, who was Imagineer at the time, along with his brother Steve Kirk, who went on to lead the creative development for Tokyo Disney Seas. So one day, while I'm working on another job for another studio, I got a call from Tim, and he said, well, would you like to come and let's have lunch? And I thought, great, we'll have lunch, catch up old times. But what he did, he had an agenda, which was to say that we're looking for new people in what was then show design. And would you be interested, was his question. I said, sure, why not? And I ended up getting an interview. I met with Peggy Van Pelt, Mike Morris, and of course, Bob Weiss, who then was leading the development of the Disney MGM Studios, which was still a year or two away from opening.
If I could interrupt here for a sec.
Please do.
Please tell the story. Again, you wind up talking to Bob Weiss, the head of the project, but you don't know that he's the head of the project. And at that moment, he shows you the park and makes the mistake of asking you, well, what do you think? So can you tell what happens at that moment?
Yeah, well, Bob and the entire Disney MGM studio team, they were not in a high rent district. No. They had a temporary trailer that was hauled onto the parking lot there at 1401 Glendale Flower Street. And they, you walk in, it didn't look that great. And so inside of a conference room, the only conference room they had, which looked like something like an old stuffed closet, probably a lot like the place that Jim Hill works out of.
There we go.
Yes, papers, boxes, books, paraphernalia, all kinds of stuff.
Absolutely.
But Bob rolls out a map, and he asked me a question. Remember, I still don't know who he is. And his question was, well, what do you think of this? And I gave him my honest opinion. Why wouldn't I? And only afterward, as I left, as I was being walked out behind the security counter back onto the parking lot at 1401 Flower Street, did I learn that he was the head of the Disney MGM Studio project creatively, which was a role I was being hired to fulfill. And I thought, well, that's great. At least I have a place to go back to pay my rent. And maybe because they were blind, naive, or had short memories, I did get a job there. And I thought, well, this will last probably about 5 months, which is typical in the studio business. But I ended up being there for, as you said earlier, over 3 decades.
That's crazy. So I want to talk a little bit about Imagineering for those of us who don't know exactly how Imagineering works. I think people lump everybody in together, but there are like different tracks that you can take. So can you kind of explain the different tracks you can take in Imagineering and like what your role or like specialty was?
Well, Lauren, after being there over 3 decades, I'm not sure how Imagineering works. But what I observed was a lot of the Imagineers came from different places. I said earlier, they came from the studio or from entertainment or from food or retail. And what they all shared in common, at least the successful ones did, is they were multidimensional. They didn't just come from step out of a college class and into their job. They had practical knowledge. I mean, recently I learned that Rolly Crump this weekend has a display. There's a museum display in a local gallery here in West Hollywood, and it's only for this weekend. But Rolly Crump had worked at the studio. He came to WDI. He left WDI, started his own studio, came back a few times, but he did this whole set of, well, what you'd call rock posters in the 1960s and 70s. And that's what's on display. And it's an example that I bring up to show that here you have a Disney legend who was multidimensional. They weren't single track. They were people who could not only say, this is what I wanted to draw or want to create, but they could tell you pretty much how to do it. And that's something that made them very special.
If I could interject here for a sec, Lauren, the last time I saw some documentation, there's 150 different, at least 150 different disciplines
Oh, wow.
working under one roof there at Imagineering. And as Jim mentioned, a lot of them have their own specialities and, and are brought in to work on very specific aspects of projects. But a lot of different talents, a lot of different bodies of knowledge under one roof there.
And let me add there that they get to their solutions in very unique ways. We had there was a ride engineer, and he was presented with a problem for this ride. The idea that the creative team had was that you'd be able to hang glide over California, the state of California, for this new park they were planning, Disney's California Adventure. And so this individual puzzled for a while and said, I'll get back to you on Monday. And that weekend, he went and borrowed I use borrowed in air quotes. He borrowed his son's erector set. And on Monday, he came back with a fully functional erector set, visual, physical representation of not what they built, but what they could build. And suddenly, sitting on the table in the middle of the conference room, everyone gathered around and went, oh, the estimator said, I understand what that costs. The project manager says, I know how to build that. The civil engineer said, oh, I know how we're going to approach that. All of the disciplines said, we don't have the answers, but we do now have a path. And that's very typical. And there are 100 stories like that I could tell. But that's just one of them, and it's a prime example of how Imagineers think.
Okay, I just thank you for bringing up the story about soaring, because I love the when they were trying to figure out how to make the earlier version of soaring, which wasn't the ride system based on how your clothes go around the store for dry cleaning. I mean, Lauren, the idea here was that you were basically going to dangle like a
blazer.
Like a blazer, all right, but you were going to fly over this elaborate miniature of California. And as Jim just mentioned, the ride engineer, that's not going to work. That's not practical, guys. So that has no capacity.
Well, and going off road for the moment, I know the team that worked on Delta Dream Flight. Mm-hmm. They're in the Magic Kingdom in Florida in Tomorrowland. And that's a prime example. Although it's a ground-based transportation system, the Omnimover, all of the sets, they had a set for Japan, and they had another set of Europe. And those were all forced perspective at a raked angle going downhill. And they brought in those people, and they looked at each other and said, oh, no, you don't want to do the idea of hanging from a clothesline over a physical miniature of California. Whatever you want to do, you don't want to do that.
Well, if anyway, just a quick side story. And there's a reason you don't want to do that, because guests drop things. So your lovely in perspective scene of the sequoias in California is suddenly thrown off by the giant set of mouse ears that fell off of somebody's head into your beautiful miniature.
Yeah, that would throw off the scale. Yes,
Yeah,
you're
well,
right.
I bring this up because I remember one day riding through Peter Pan flight at Walt Disney World, and I'm sorry, this had to be deliberate, but you're flying over the scene where Captain Hook is standing on top of the crocodile's jaws, and the legs are moving apart, and some unkindly guest had thrown a Raggedy Ann doll directly into the crocodile's jaws. So it's not only Captain Hook almost being eaten, but Raggedy Ann is going down for the count.
Oh, I've got to ask, how much do you think the trauma therapy, set the company back?
There we go.
Okay, Jim. So Jim Shull, you talk about having multidisciplines and being well-rounded, and I mean that's what you were. I know that you talk about all these other Disney legends and some of the greats, but I mean, just from talking to you over the last couple years, I mean, you were working in marketing, and you worked for Marvel at one point, and we're talking pound puppies, and you've worked on hotels and roller coasters and lands. Like, is that what you're talking about? What, like, you just have to be diversified in your body of work? And I mean, like, I mean, lots of concept art. Like, can you just talk about some of the projects that you've worked on that people might not know about? And then I swear we will talk about maps. Is that what we're here for?
Oh, well, the projects people might not know about, of course, are the projects that never got built. As we've covered before on Disney Unpacked, and I cover now on Disney Journey on YouTube, the rate of success at any Disney project is 1 in 10. There'd be 10 ideas I would develop, and 7 of them would be dismissed immediately. 3 of them would get a little bit of traction, but only 1 was actually built. And that's not because it necessarily is a bad idea. It's just, if you're trying to compete for, marketing and money for a Disney World project, remember they have 4 parks, which means your little project, which is going to go into a park, is competing with 3 other project teams that are also promoting their projects. So it's going to go in the other 3 parks, and only 1 can win. So it's like a little bit of a, horse race by death. So it's
morbid.
Not the easiest. Well, yeah, but it's Halloween. Halloween is approaching,
Okay.
kids. So, and we've talked about Raggedy Ann in the jaws of a crocodile. So, I think that ship is already sailed, Lauren. But the jobs that maybe people don't know about are really the fun ones often, because like I started. Well, 100 Years of Magic was one that comes to mind, because I'll just tell one story, I promise, because we need to talk fun maps. For 100 Years of Magic, that was a celebration of Walt Disney's 100th birthday, celebration of his birth back in 2000-ish. And so one of the things I wanted to do was to, bring one of Walt's offices to Florida. But that means prying that office away from where it was on display in the Disneyland Opera House there in Anaheim. And so the promise to the people in Anaheim, we promise you that it'll only be temporary. And they, believed us. And so everything was packed up and on a truck. And the temporary display was, I don't know, years, not months, definitely not weeks. It was in Florida for many, many years before it finally was, I'm not even sure it was returned. Maybe a fake or a replica was returned to its location, but it's kind of the way things go. And some of the most fun projects are the ones that people don't really know, because one of the things about Walt's office was everything had to be documented, which meant I went and I got into the set, and it's still bending down to his desktop or looking at some of the old scripts. There was still that whiff of his cigarette smoke.
Wow.
And that's something that I don't think the average, great Disney fan would know.
I mean, hey, with that animatronic coming to Disneyland, I mean, you think there might be a little smell? They're making authentic?
Well, they could bring back Smellizer, and they did pioneer that with the charcoal smell in the burning of Rome scene there in Spaceship Earth. So Disney knows how to do it. Imagineers can bring in that oh so lovely smell of tobacco smoke when Walt pivots around in there in Disneyland in a few months.
It's so interesting you bring this up because in researching the show for today, I was looking at, for example, a photo of Peter Ellenshaw painting the map of Disneyland. In fact, it's the map of Disneyland that if you ever watched the very first episode of the Disneyland TV show, which, by the way, again, we're recording today on October 18th, 2024, and 70 years ago today, the very first episode of the Disneyland TV show aired on ABC. So this was when America saw this map for the first time. But what's so funny is that I came across a color photo today of Peter Ellenshaw painting the map, and Walt's in there consulting with him. And it's these days it is so rare to see a picture of Walt Disney smoking. The company went on this blitz of erasing anytime there was a cigarette in Walt's hand, it was gone. And so just today, it's like, wow, Walt smoking and in color. So, but anyway, I guess now we're officially talking about maps. And again, want to stress here, folks, that what we're talking about today, again, we just told the story about Peter Ellenshaw painting that map that Walt used in the television show. But that was not a map. That was a concept painting. That was something that was done to show what the park would be like. And also, just to be clear here, a lot of people know the concept drawing that Herbie Ryman did in 53. That was a thing that he and Walt worked on together over a weekend, and then Roy took it out to New York. In fact, that was when he horse traded with the executives at ABC. It's like, you help fund Walt's fun park, and we'll do a couple of TV shows for your network. But what we're talking about today, the fun maps, are, again, as Jim mentioned at the very top of the show today, these souvenirs that you could, they were really just 50 cents a piece, Jim?
Oh, they were cheap. They were incredibly cheap. But again, times have changed. And, today, if they were sold, I'm sure they'd be more than 50 cents. And again, on as we alluded to, as a collectible, they're a whole lot more than 50 cents. Recently, Disneyana had their convention in Irvine, California that I attended. And again, they had a huge ballroom and people are selling the old fun maps. And, you're breaking out your checkbook if you want to buy one of those today.
No. Absolutely. And the reason that people are willing to pay top dollar for these things is, again, they were done by Sam McKim. Who we were doing a little pre-gaming on the show. And Sam had an absolutely fascinating career. I mean, Sam started... he was out, family moved to LA, and he wound up working as a child actor. In fact, he did a lot of Westerns with folks like Gene Autry and John Wayne. And it was only after he'd been a child actor that he went off to art school and learned his craft. And I think we were talking a little bit about, one of the reasons that Sam was so good at working in theme park environments like Main Street USA and Frontierland is, well, he'd spent a lot of time on sets that could have been Main Street USA or Frontierland. Though, Mr. Shull, you were pointing out, not the real Wild West, or not the real turn of the century, but the Hollywood version, right?
No, they're not the real ones, but they are based on reality. And even here, in California, in Los Angeles, where I'm recording from, there was still a lot of old buildings that are hanging around. And less than a mile from my house is Walt Disney's Golden Oak Ranch, which Gene Autry owned at one point, and where Walt kept his bison and his buffalo, which he then donated to the William S. Hart Park, which is now a county park. Now it's actually being transferred to the city of Santa Clarita. And there's his mansion with a museum. And, if you ever go by here in Newhall, California, you can swing on by and see Walt's old buffalo herd still moseying around on the hillsides.
Well, and now speaking of Western related stuff, I want to share a story about one of Sam's first really big gigs at Disney. Now, mind you, after he finished at art school, and he got the opportunity to work at 20th Century Fox as a scenic designer. And so he starts there at 53. There are layoffs in 54, which is why he's available to come work on Disneyland. And so one of the very first things that Sam get tasked to work on is they're working on the Golden Horseshoe for Frontierland. But the thing is that Sam's like, oh, it's a saloon. Oh, hey, I worked on that Doris Day movie, Calamity Jane in 53 for Fox. And it's like, I know what the inside of a saloon looks like. In fact, let me pull out my old reference. And just these days, people who watch, and yeah, by the way, you could get, again, Calamity Jane, available for viewing even today. But if you watch that movie, it's like, and you get to the scenes that are set inside of the Deadwood Saloon, it's like, that saloon looks really familiar, really, really familiar. Like Sam basically copied the film set and had it built for real at Disneyland.
Well, and not just for real, but for permanent. Because like any film set in a movie,
Yep.
It only has the side finish that faces the camera. You walk around to the side or the back, and it's plywood and duct tape and a couple sandbags holding it up. And it's not meant to last. Once the film is in the can, the director would yell cut, and they would tear the set down. So what Sam was doing was brilliant. He was taking everything that he saw and knew, and he completed the scene. He would build the back walls. And again, going back to what we said earlier about disciplines, Sam would work with the architects, because Sam could say, this is what I want to look like. And the architect then would have to make it look real, and then in turn pass it off to the operator at Disneyland, because they'd actually have to have a place to pass through the food, and a cooker and a fry and a refrigerator and a freezer. And all of that was necessary if you're going to take something that was only going to be in a movie for a second or two and make it something that was permanent to be lasting for decades in Anaheim.
I mean, speaking of like decades in Anaheim, we know that the Sam McKim, had a long, healthy career. And as we were, preparing for today's show, I was going through the maps book. I know that, Jim, I think you were going to mention, if you like maps, that you might want to grab a copy of this, and notice that Sam McKim did the map for Euro Disney. And so my question to Jim Hill was, does Jim Shull know him? Because, that was one of your, first really big projects, right?
Well, actually, I do know Sam, but I was introduced to Sam by his son, who also was a Disney Imagineer, Matt. And as typical at Imagineering, you never know who you'll find. And it was very typical. You'd think that a Disney legend would get a nice plush office when he was brought back for a special assignment. No. So I was walking down through the hallway, and there was Matt McKim, making some corrections, waiting to talk to Tony Baxter, because he was working on the fun map, the original fun map that was going to be sold there at Euro Disneyland on opening day. And I walked by and kind of did that spit take of going, wait, you're Sam McKim. Didn't you ask for a better gig than sitting in a little, 4x4 cubicle that looks like it's been having rats been making their nests in here? No, he was fine. Because again, where Euro Disneyland was designed was an old factory that there was no air conditioning. At the very back of the building were a couple of AC units that vented to the back to a rail yard. And the choice was either you burned up or you had the air conditioner turned on. It sounded like a 747 taking off because the noise was that great. And amidst all this glamour, there was Sam McKim working on a fun map for Euro Disneyland.
Oh, but But the part of the story that's intriguing here is that Sam had left the company, had retired in 1986 after working for Disney for 32 years. But he was brought back deliberately to do the Euro Disneyland fun map because just laying it out there, Lauren, all of these kids who grew up, who went to Disneyland and bought the fun map and eventually became Imagineers, and now they're designing their Disney theme park for Paris. And it's just sort of like, we want the same map, the same sort of map that we got when we went to Disneyland. And that's like, we got to bring Sam back to do the map for us. So, I mean, that's what's so much fun. If you take the Euro Disneyland map from 92 and you lay it next to the ones that Sam did starting in 58 through 64, and they have that same quality. There's so much fun detail, or more to the point, there's all sorts of attractions that he puts on there that, oh yeah, we were going to do that, and we didn't.
Oh, and that was intentional, because just like the original Disneyland Anaheim fun maps, those would have future attractions, and they'd be marked, stamped, future attraction. In that same way, Tony Baxter and the creative team for Euro Disneyland, they fully intended to have an Indiana Jones ride. So there it is. Sam McKim drew the Indiana Jones Temple ride there in the Euro Disneyland fun map. Oh, and also, I think if you look really close, you'll see the same balloon vendor and the same police officer standing on Main Street, USA, in Sam's map for Europe.
I mean, again, Jim's not wrong. You look at the map. There's the Beauty and the Beast sit-down show. There's the earliest iteration of the Little Mermaid ride, which didn't get built for that park. But again, to circle back to the maps that Sam started doing in '58. For Disneyland. In fact, there's a funny story. Evidently, he got the gig because of Tom Sawyer Island. That as the story goes, I mean, Walt Disney was very, very, very hands-on with the original Tom Sawyer's Island out in Anaheim. In fact, the famous story of he took the blueprint home over the weekend. And didn't he hand draw in the coves, Jim?
Yeah, that is a story. He was very much working from his ideal version or vision of what his childhood would have been in a perfect world. And so, well, again, the story of Tom Sawyer's Island was, well, if you've ever looked at Anaheim, it's a pretty flat place. And so into this flat place, they wanted to build the rivers of America. So they had to scoop out all this dirt. Well, you got to put the dirt somewhere. And so they piled it in the center of the river, and suddenly, voila, they had an island. But it's an island that they had to transform and shape. And Walt took his childhood idealized version and vision of what that would look like and marked up the drawings and brought them back in and said, here, build this.
There we go. Okay, so Lauren, picture this. So that this is something that is very near and dear to Walt. But it occurs to Walt that, as people get off the raft to go to Tom Sawyer's Island, they're going to need something that explains this is here, that's there, and so it's like, wow, oh crud, we need a map. And it just it's kind of an all hands on deck situation, and it falls to Sam to do the map of Tom Sawyer's Island for the opening summer. And Walt loves this map. Like, oh, holy cow, look at this map. This is great. And it's like, Sam, I want you to do something like this for the whole park. I tell you what, we'll sell it. And that's where the first fun map, the souvenir for 58 came from.
So was it a fun map because it was Walt's Fun Park? Or is there any, significance in the name of the souvenir maps?
I think, as Mr. Shull just mentioned, what's really great about the maps that were done by Sam of that era is if you look down into the individual lands. I mean, as Jim just mentioned, there's a policeman on Main Street. There's a balloon vendor. I mean, Sam just packed this thing with crazy, crazy levels of detail. I mean, you could look.
Well, and there's a horse car on Main Street, and there's a omnibus on Main Street, and it's just not any bus. It's a very detailed, very specific kind of bus. So I would say it again. I think what resonates about Sam's work is it was so authentic and it was sincere. It looked like he was drawing something that had been built, when in fact, it was something that was still in the construction phase. But when you buy that map and you look at it, you go, oh, everything's here. And because you can walk down Main Street and it's there on his map. Therefore, when you look at the other things he drew, like Liberty Street or Edison Square or the old original New Orleans Square, where there was a haunted mansion and it was listed as a wax museum. And now it's future attraction, but everything else on that map has been built. So therefore, I believe that I can come back here later on and visit the haunted mansion, which again is so brilliant because it was on its own merits a marketing tool to
Yes.
get people to come back.
So Jim, have you ever worked on a map when you were at Disney?
I did. I did a couple of maps. There was a couple of the maps and they've been released. When I did Mickey's Toontown, the development, I did a full map for the Gadget Go coaster. And walking in the spirit of Sam McKim, I thought if I drew every detail, then handed it over to the project team, when they subcontracted out to vendors who had no idea what this project was about that I was proposing, they'd look at it and go, oh, well, he must mean this. And, he'll accept this if I build this because it's in his drawing. So this must mean what he wants us to build is in that drawing. So I did Gadget Go Coaster, and they later on, the Disney company did release that, and it's in some of the maps. And later on in the Art of Disneyland Paris, they just released one of my fun maps for the Toon Studio. So they leak out there.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. Well, I had to ask the question because we've spent a decent amount of time together, and I know that you're a big Disney paper collector, but I didn't know if you actually worked on them yourself. I saw some of the things that you worked up for Disney Unpacked, and if you've seen Jim Shull's work, he has his own very cool style. But as I was going through this book, I have another map-related question. I'm going through the Disney Park map book, and I would say like almost half or at least a quarter of these maps, they say that the person that created them is unknown. So is there a reason? Did they pay per per sketch of these things where they don't want people to know who actually created the map?
If I could interject here for a moment, and Jim
so.
can back me up here. It's often as not, for example, Sam only did the maps for Disneyland from 58 to 64. But if you go online, you can look at Disneyland maps they sold at the park right up until 78. And it's clear that the maps have been, the style of the map changes a little bit, but they're definitely based on Sam's original work. But but there's a lot of hands touching these things, right, Jim? So it's these projects are often camels, right?
Yeah, and then if you look, a best example, if you look at the original first map that was released of the Magic Kingdom at Disney World, it's very, very different. I wouldn't use the word crude because it is professional, but it's definitely not a Sam McKim level of detail that's been put into it. Now, I can't tell you why. Sometimes there'll be a need and they'll find an individual, usually internally and usually from someone from consumer products, which was a great resource for the company if you need artwork. Unfortunately, a lot of these people are lost, their names are lost to the mists of time, but there are Disney fans who are trying to discover and give credit to all of these individuals who have labored so much to create great art, great memories for all of us.
It makes you feel bad. It says artist unknown. It's like, these are fantastic. Like, I'm looking right now at the original Epcot Center map. And hey, can you guys guess what's over? What's over there that I see that you might be talking about on Disney Unpacked here pretty soon?
Equatorial Africa. Yeah. Yeah, but again, that as Jim mentioned at the top of the show, that in the grand tradition of the Sam McKim maps, that's listed as a future attraction, just which never got built, just like Edison Square and just like Liberty Street, or the Wax Museum. But at the same time, as Mr. Shull was mentioning, that was like, oh, I'm going to have to come back for that. Wow, that looks cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I mean it's this one particular, it's fantastic. So Jim Shull, I know that you said you have quite the paper collection yourself. What do you have? What do you own?
Oh, well, I think my wife is going to kill me when she
Sorry,
listens to this
Tracy.
podcast, but yeah, I do have a lot. And one of the things I do is I have a complete collection of all the Disneyland park maps, all except one, which is one. And this is a story that a lot of people don't know. Disneyland and the Disney company had a lot of participant sponsors, and they were given the rights to issue their own version of the maps. And there was the Insurance Company of America that had the rights to the Sam McKim map of the early version, the very early version. And so there's one I'm tracing down because I know it exists. I've seen it, but I don't have a copy of the one of Sam McKim's maps for Disneyland, but it has stamped right on it as part of the artwork, courtesy of the International, Insurance Company of America.
Holy cow. Okay. All
Wow.
right. Well, if anybody listening to the show has a line on one of those, please let us know. And by the way, just to circle back to you were mentioning about unknown artists that work on the maps. I just want to touch for a second here. They did for the 50th anniversary of Disneyland. They did a new version of the fun map in the Sam McKim style, but this time around, it was Nina Ray Vaughan who did it, and you knew Nina, right, Jim?
Yeah, I worked with Nina for a long, long time. There was an era when if you saw a piece of WDI marketing art or concept art, it was probably Nina Ray Vaughan who did it. I would visit her a lot in her office. And let me tell a story here that Nina was very old school. So that means this is all pre-digital. So she would draw or paint little thumbnails, and they were about, they would be about 2 foot, maybe 48 inches tops on the width, and they were proportional in the height. But she would paint these and then bring them to the project team to say, here, give me your notes and I'll do the full size versions. But I would go into her office and she had a shelf built that was at the ceiling level. And it was this gallery of all these little beautiful thumbnail, immaculate paintings of everything she had ever done. Now, she went on, as Jim Hill said, to do a fun map for Disneyland decades after they'd had an official fun map from Sam McKim. But she also went on to do another fun map, this one for Hong Kong Disneyland.
Oh.
So if you go
I
again
just saw
online, you
that
go and
one.
search,
Or in this
you
maps
know,
book that I'm looking at, she's in here a ton. It looked
she is
like.
in here a ton. She was brought in, championed by Tony Baxter to, bring back some of the flavor because, again, there's a group of Imagineers of a certain era who recognized that these were treasures and highly sought objects for anyone's collection.
Oh,
Okay.
absolutely, absolutely. And I remember, I think I saw on X that weren't you doing a fun map as a retirement project, just having some fun? What was that about? And are you still working on
Yeah,
it?
I not as much as I should. My goal in life is there are the 12 Disney parks worldwide, and I've completed 3 of the 12 fun maps in my style, my hand. And I don't know what I'm going to do with them or how I'll release them, but the plan is that I'll complete 12 maps for each of the Disney parks and then make some good use of them. Now, having said that, Disney keeps building. I wish they'd, put a pause on it because no sooner did I start working and get real traction on the Walt Disney Studios Paris that they announced, oh no, we're going to make this change now and rebrand that park as Disney Adventure World. And all right, I'm going to go back and work on the Magic Kingdom there in Walt Disney World. And then, like a week later, they announced, oh, well, the Rivers of America is going to be drained and we're going to put in our version of Cars Land and maybe the Villains Land. So I think I've got to go and channel the spirit of Sam McKim and maybe just, put a cloud over that area.
Thank
Future
you.
development.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. That's the other thing I love about. Now, mind you, this is more concept painting than map thing, but there is a creative conceit that Mr. Shull is mentioning here. The effect of when you're looking at a concept painting for a Disney park and they're not quite sure what's going to go there. What Disneyland had that observation balloon, and I want to say Animal Kingdom had like birds and clouds and shafts of light, and I forget. Didn't they do the exact same thing with the early MGM as well? They brought back the observation balloon.
Yeah, I can't speak to that directly because memory doesn't serve me well here. But I remember Dan Gouze, an artist who we just lost recently. He was the master of using and manipulating all of those conceits together. And you'd have a flock of birds or of the ray of sunlight that would be coming out of the clouds that would cause a rainbow to appear. And you kind of look back and go, okay, I know there's something behind that rainbow, but he doesn't know. Dan doesn't know what it is. And he's not telling us because he doesn't know. So, but it does sure look pretty.
And now, speaking of losing artists, it's interesting that Nina did the tribute map in 2005 in Sam's style, because we actually lost Sam in July of 2004 at the age of 72. And but here's the thing, Lauren. Sam was a really, really humble guy. And it's interesting as somebody who started their career in performing in front of the camera, just very self-effacing, shied away from the spotlight. And so it kind of irked me personally that when we lost Sam, that he had yet to be recognized with a window on Main Street. And so I actually wrote a story in the days following Sam's passing to the effect of that. And it just seemed to me it was a travesty that this guy who, so many of us knew because of his fun maps. And in fact, that's the other thing. Sam had a little fun with the fun map. And in fact, one of the things you had to do when you were looking for the map is somewhere there would be, was it SCM or SM when he signed the maps, Jim?
Yeah, it would be a hidden eye test for people.
There we go. All right. You had to find where he had signed his map. But anyway, I just, to the effect of said, come on, if there's ever somebody who deserved a window on Main Street, it's Sam McKim. Okay, now we jump ahead to Sam's funeral. I mean, graveside, his son, Matt, senior production designer at Imagineering, is reading some comments. And I literally heard this from friends who were that day. In the middle of his paying tribute to his dad, reads a chunk of my story to the effect of, and it's a travesty that Sam McKim doesn't have a window on Main Street. And it got back to me that Marty Sklar, head of Imagineering, is there at the funeral and walks up to Matt and Sam's widow Dot, and it's like, I am so sorry. We should have done this years ago. I'm going to make this right. And sure enough, May of 2006, he gets his window on Main Street. In fact, he gets to share a space. He's right across the way from the gentleman he worked on, Herbie Ryman and John Hench. And here's what it says in the window: that cartography masterworks Sam McKim, map maker to the kingdom. There's magic in the details. So they finally paid tribute to what he did better than anyone.
Sam McKim is finally in good company there at Disneyland, but also we can't not notice the fact that, Sam McKim would be 100 years old as of this December. But moreover, if you're in Southern California this Sunday, November the 10th, there at the Bowers Museum in Santa Ana, California, there's going to be a celebration, a one-day only celebration, which is the Sam McKim Centennial Celebration. Again, this is going to be a place that friends and family are going to come together to celebrate Sam McKim, his talents, his life, and his work. And so if you go there, it'll be Sunday, November the 10th at the Bowers Museum there in Santa Ana, California.
That is incredible. And I mean, like, think about the timing of this episode. Wow.
More to the point, I love that Sam even now gets his time in the spotlight. No, thank you, Mr. Shull, for sharing that. I highly recommend for our listeners out in that part of the country, go check that out. I'm sure there are going to be some amazing stories shared and some impressive pieces of artwork on display.
Wow. Okay. Well, on that note, I do think that unfortunately it is time to close up shop for today. But before we go, I did want to let everybody know what's kind of coming up.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So,
What's coming up, Jim?
Well, we were just talking about it in today's show, the unbuilt Equatorial Africa pavilion. But what's kind of interesting about this topic over at Disney Impact, we're doing something we've never, ever done before. We're actually doing, this is, effectively a two-parter in that first we talk about the pavilion itself, and Mr. Shull shares all sorts of stories about the process at Imagineering and why projects that get this far along then just don't make it onto the canvas. And then we actually do an even deeper dive. Mr. Testa reached out to the University of Tennessee and got access to Alex Haley's personal papers, and we do a deep dive on the film that Mr. Haley was creating for Disney that would have been shown at the Equatorial Africa Pavilion. What was it called again, Jim? Africa Rediscovered?
Africa Rediscovered. It was a major showpiece that was very different from any Disney film that had ever been done before, because rather than being just a travelogue, Alex Haley had really great ambitions. He was going to be covering all 10,000 years of the history and the culture of Equatorial Africa in a very unique and ambitious fashion.
Well, that sounds amazing. I can't wait to listen to that show. And coming up on I Want That Too, we are going to be talking with Garner Holt. If you are not familiar, he and his company are behind some of Disney's most iconic animatronic creations, talking from Haunted Mansion to Pirates of the Caribbean. So I'm assuming we're going to talk about, how Garner Holt and his company brought those characters to life. So you don't want to miss Disney Unpacked or what's coming up here on I Want That Too. And Mr. Shull, how can people keep up with what's going on with you, sir?
People can also find me over at Disney Journey with Jim Shull. That's my new YouTube channel. And that's where I share my personal memories as a Disney Imagineer. And that includes, film, video, images, and a lot of personal stories. So you can find me over at Disney Journeys with Jim Shull on YouTube.
And if I might interject here, Jim has great stories looking back on his career, but looking forward. And in fact, just recently, to tie in with the Garner Holt thing we'll be doing here on I Want That shortly, Mr. Testa, Mr. Shull, and I went up to Garner's new facility in Redlands, California. This would have been last year, right, Jim?
Yeah, it feels like we drove for days to get there, but it's a beautiful new facility full of treasures from the Disney company.
Well, but what was especially interesting about the time we visited there, Lauren, it was that Garner had gotten the job of redoing the Swiss Family Treehouse for Disneyland, now the Adventureland Treehouse, and what was fascinating for the four of us as we walked the show floor with Garner himself leading us around the building is that there was the water wheel from the Swiss Family Treehouse. There were all sorts of props and things that they were redoing.
Oh, and there was also the ostrich. He was building an animatronic ostrich. And what was great about that day is we'd walk along and it would be his team and they'd be feathering the ostrich. And, we'd ask about it and he'd go, can't talk about it, can't talk about it.
So,
but it's an ostrich, Garner. It's an ostrich. There are people working on it. You're working on the treehouse. I can't talk about
there
it.
You go. You live in the world of the NDA. So that said, Lauren, going to be interesting to see what stories Garner can share with us. So
Well, he might be talking about some birds. So,
there we go.
you
So,
never know. You never know. So you don't want to miss that episode. And if you have, questions, suggestions for future episodes, like Paul reached out with the Disney Fun Maps, please reach out to us. It's Jim at jimhillmedia.com, where I can be found at Lauren at laurenhersey.com. And just make sure that you're following along on social media, Jim Hill Media Podcast Network, Facebook, Instagram, X, and, we keep people up to date with everything happening on the network. So thank you so much, Mr. Shull, for coming and being a part of this fun episode of I Want That Too. And we'll see you next time.